Before sunrise on September 5, 1982, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch folded a Sunday edition of the Des Moines Register into his yellow canvas bag, standing at the corner of 42nd Street and Marquardt Lane in West Des Moines, Iowa. The streetlights were still burning. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of suburban silence that feels permanent until it isn't. Johnny had delivered papers along this route for months, the rhythm of it familiar, the weight of the bag pulling at his shoulder, the soft thump of each rolled edition landing on a doorstep. His father usually walked with him on Sunday mornings, but on this particular morning Johnny went alone. By 7 a.m., Johnny Gosch was gone. The first sign that something was wrong was not a missing boy. It was an undelivered newspaper. A customer called to complain that their Sunday paper had never arrived. A small, ordinary grievance that would crack open a case file destined to haunt American missing children investigations for more than 4 decades. Here is what the record shows. Johnny was 12 years old when he disappeared, sometime between 6 and 7 a.m., while working his Sunday paper route. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, would later describe it precisely. He vanished at the crack of dawn, starting his route and never finished it. His parents, Noreen and John Gosch, had no reason to expect this. Their son was a routine kid on a routine morning, but when Johnny didn't come home, and when the complaint about the missing newspaper reached his father, John drove the route himself, tracing the path his son had walked 1,000 times. The wagon was still there, sitting abandoned on the sidewalk, still heavy with undelivered bundles. Johnny's yellow bag was gone. The street was empty. What happened in that missing hour between 6 and 7, the narrow window in which a boy and his newspaper bag simply ceased to exist along a residential Iowa street, is the question this file keeps returning to. No one saw the moment itself. No one heard a struggle. But something else was noticed. A detail that would surface in witness statements and never fully resolve. A car, slow-moving, in the pre-dawn dark. A blue Ford Fairmont, according to one account, a man asking for directions, and a flicker. A dome light switched on and off 3 times, as if sending a signal to someone unseen. Now, watch what happens next, because this is the part most people miss. Before that next turn, hold on to the blue Ford Fairmont and the dome light flashing 3 times in the pre-dawn dark. That detail was never fully explained, and neither was the missing hour. If you want to keep following threads like that, stay on this case. In the comments, write "the file stays open" if you caught the signal before the police did. When the police arrived, they faced a system that was not built for this. In 1982, Iowa had no immediate response requirement for missing children. There was no national database to check. No Amber Alert. That system wouldn't exist for another 14 years. The institutional assumption, widely held at the time, was that most missing kids were runaways who would drift home on their own. Johnny Gosch had not run away. His canvas bag was still full. His route was unfinished. But the machinery of investigation, such as it was, moved slowly. Noreen Gosch, Johnny's mother, would later describe the helplessness of those first days with a precision that cuts through decades. She and John had few resources to draw on, few contacts in law enforcement beyond the local department. No playbook for what to do when your child simply vanishes between one street corner and the next. So, Noreen built her own system. She founded the Johnny Gosch Foundation. She printed flyers by the thousands. She made calls, knocked on doors, drove across state lines, and eventually testified before Congress. A mother turned investigator, assembling a case file the authorities could not or would not assemble themselves. And something remarkable happened. The system began to change. In 1984, Iowa passed a law that would become known as the Johnny Gosch Bill. the first in the nation requiring immediate police response to reports of missing children.
Okay, I understand.
No
Let's
more
get this
waiting
report filed
periods.
immediately.
No more assumptions about runaways. Because of one vanished paperboy, the legal framework shifted for every child who would go missing after him. Here is the part that complicates the story. Johnny Gosch is presumed to have been abducted. That is the formal status, as recorded by NCMEC. His face became one of the first to appear on milk cartons nationwide, a campaign that turned American breakfast tables into a distributed missing persons network. NBC News confirmed that Johnny was among the very first children featured this way. The milk carton worked in ways no one could have predicted. Millions of households suddenly saw missing children as a systemic reality, not a distant headline. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was established in 1984, built partly on the public pressure generated by cases like Johnny's. But here is the uneasy statistic hiding inside that legacy. NCMEC's own data from 2025 tells a story that undercuts the original fear. Of the 32,167 missing child cases NCMEC supported in 2025, 29,013 were resolved. More than 90% of reported cases now end with recovery. The system Johnny's disappearance helped build works for the majority, but 3,154 cases remained active at the end of that year, and 23,348 of the reports involved children missing from foster care, not snatched off suburban streets at dawn, but children lost inside the very system meant to protect them. Those foster care numbers should stop anyone still believing the machinery only protects. Stay on this case, because the next layer traces where those 23,348 children disappear inside the system. If that statistic unsettles you, type "the file stays open" in the comments and tell me which number you kept thinking about afterward. That gap is where the next part begins. Stay on this case. If you grew up seeing those milk carton faces at breakfast, and many of you did, you probably assumed the machinery worked. The data says otherwise. 92% of NCMEC's missing child cases in 2025 involved children who ran away. 1 in 7 were likely victims of child sex trafficking, the majority of them girls aged 15 to 17. Johnny Gosch's case is the rare exception, a presumed stranger abduction, but it built a system now calibrated for a very different reality. That mismatch is the quiet failure underneath the success. You have walked a street before sunrise. You know how few witnesses exist at that hour, how a block can be utterly empty, how sound travels strangely, how a car crawling past feels like nothing at all. That is what the investigation faced. The case file never closed. NCMEC still treats Johnny's disappearance as an open mystery. No arrests were ever made. No suspects were ever confirmed. The milk cartons faded from supermarket shelves, but the files stayed in the drawer, gathering weight. Some corners of the internet insist the case was solved. It was not. Some claim there were arrests or convictions. NBC News investigated and found no suspects and no arrests, then or since. The formal language from NCMEC is careful and precise. Today, he is presumed to have been abducted. That phrase, presumed abducted, carries a specific legal weight. It means the evidence points to abduction, but certainty remains out of reach. It is not a conclusion. It is an acknowledgement of an open wound. In the decades since, tips have continued to arrive. Investigators in West Des Moines have followed them all. But the trail that began on 42nd Street and Marcourt Lane has never led anywhere conclusive. The route Johnny walked that morning remains frozen in the case file. A yellow bag, a blue car, a dome light flickering 3 times in the dark. What happened after Johnny Gosch disappeared, in the period the case file quietly labels unresolved, is a question that will not settle. It is the loop this file refuses to close, the missing hour that still has no answer. Every other thread in this investigation has either resolved or reached a dead end, but that hour remains open. You may have scrolled past a missing child alert without stopping. Most of us have. That is the trade-off the system asks for. A deluge of faces that trains us to look away even as it rescues thousands. The data says the system works for the vast majority. The data also says 3,154 families ended 2025 without answers. This file belongs to one of them. NCMEC's 2025 impact page lists the numbers plainly. 32,167 missing child cases supported, 29,013 resolved, 3,154 still active, 90% recovered. The system Johnny's disappearance helped build is by any metric a success. But Johnny himself sits outside that statistic. He never came home. His face, once on a million milk cartons, now exists mostly in archives and old news footage. His mother continued to search for him for the rest of her life. The wagons that carried the Des Moines Register along that route were eventually retired. The street at 42nd and Marquardt Lane still exists, unchanged, ordinary. Sunrise still comes every morning to West Des Moines. On September 5, 1982, it came without Johnny Gosch. Per NCMEC, he is presumed to have been abducted. No one has ever been arrested. The case is still open, the file stays open. Somewhere in the records, across decades of paper and data, across witness statements and abandoned leads, the next layer is waiting to be found. If you are holding any piece of that story, the West Des Moines Police Department and NCMEC at 1-800-THE-LOST still want to hear it. The route ends, but the search does not. The system built in Johnny's wake processes thousands of files every year, and the machinery that once had nothing now has national databases, immediate response protocols, Amber alerts that reach phones within seconds. It is a monument to a boy who never returned, a scaffold raised from an absence. But the ledger has a column that never balances. For every recovered child, for every runaway found safe in another state, for every young person pulled from trafficking, there remains the original entry, the one that started it all, the one that refuses resolution. The ledger still carries that one entry that refuses resolution, the original name the entire system was built around. If you want to stay on this case and follow the file as the next layer opens, that is exactly the reason we keep returning to it. In the comments, write "the file stays open" if you remember Johnny Gosch, or if this was the first time you understood what the machinery was built to hold. That is the weight this file carries. It is not the story of a system that failed, nor a system that succeeded. It is the story of a system that was born from one unsolved hour, and now holds millions of outcomes. Almost all of them hopeful, one of them still waiting. Johnny Gosch went out to deliver papers before dawn on a Sunday in September. The sun came up over West Des Moines, and the route was never finished. The file remains open, not because anyone gave up, but because the answer has never arrived, and so the case sits where it has always sat. Unresolved, unresolved, unresolved. A quiet reminder that some searches outlast the searchers, and some hours never quite end. That is the quiet truth of this case, and it is the reason it still matters. Not because it is the most famous disappearance, and not because it is the most disturbing. It matters because it is the hinge, the moment the old system failed so completely that a new one had to be built from scratch. The neighbors on Marquardt Lane went back inside their houses that Sunday morning. The customer who complained about the missing newspaper got a refund, or maybe an apology, and probably forgot the whole thing by lunchtime. But the boy who never delivered that paper became something else entirely. A catalyst, a ghost in the machinery. The reason a 12-year-old's face ended up on a national platform. There is a photograph of Johnny from that era. the one that went on the flyers and the cartons. He is wearing a striped shirt, smiling slightly, the kind of school picture that every family has. That is who the country saw at breakfast for years. A boy who should have grown up, who should have had his own children, who should have walked that route 1,000 more times in the bright light of ordinary days. Instead, his name became a statute. His face became a campaign. His disappearance became the template for a national response that has since saved tens of thousands of children. And the hour between 6 and 7 on that September morning remains exactly as it was, empty, silent, unaccounted. That is the real legacy, not a mystery solved, but a system built from an absence. Not an answer, but a question that refuses to fade. The file is open because the truth is owed to a 12-year-old who never came home, and to the mother who spent her life asking for it. Somewhere, in that hour before sunrise, the story is still waiting to be told.